When the handheld wars began in September of 1989, I was all in on the Atari Lynx. However, I always wondered about the quality of games on the competing Sega Game Gear and Nintendo Game Boy. Were they better? Worse? So today I want to compare some games that appeared on all three and see which ones I prefer. To make it fair, I'm going to try and compare the earliest created games for each system. That way I'm not comparing a game released in 1990 versus another system's game that was released in 1995. So I'll give 2 points for first place, 1 point for second, and 0 points for third. Okay, great. Let's start with Awesome Golf. One of the most enjoyable golf games I've ever played, Awesome Golf gives you a variety of options and 3 18-hole courses. It has a very easy to use interface, easy to learn controls, and some incredible scaling graphics. Also, the voice is great, much better than mine.
Oh no!
I also love the little graphic you get after sinking a putt. Birdie, bogey, or par. That's awesome! Here we have PGA Tour Golf for the Game Gear, and it looks to be based on the computer game. It also has lots of options and 4 courses to play. Hitting the ball isn't very intuitive and the graphics are very slow to draw. On Game Boy we have Golf, which seems pretty basic. There are 2 courses to choose from, but hey, at least hitting the ball is how you would expect. Push the button once to start the meter below, and again for your power, and again for the accuracy. So in my opinion, I still like Awesome Golf the best, then Golf for the Game Boy, and then PGA Tour Golf for the Game Gear. Baseball Heroes. The Lynx baseball game looks like it might be great. It's got large player sprites, lots of voice, and detailed graphics. But swinging the bat is incredibly slow. On defense, the perspective changes when you chase down the ball, which confuses me as to which way I'm supposed to run. Majors Pro Baseball for Game Gear is more of what I wanted from a baseball game. You've got your behind the batter view for both pitching and hitting, which is perfect. Controls are exactly like I expected, and I love the pacing. It's fast, easy to play, and fun. Baseball for the Game Boy is a typical baseball game. Only it's pretty slow throwing the ball from the outfield. And even by Game Boy standards, the graphics are boring and lack any kind of detail. My ranking here is Majors Pro Baseball for Game Gear, then Baseball for the Game Boy, and then Baseball Heroes. Batman Returns. I was so excited when this game was announced for the Lynx. It's got 4 stages, large sprites, interesting music, and an endless amount of enemies. So many that it's best to just run past them to get to the boss. It does have good controls though. Now Batman Returns for the Game Gear is also a side-scrolling action game, but it has much smaller graphics and a different feel to the gameplay. Batman can use a grappling hook, which is pretty cool. So I couldn't find a Batman Returns game for Game Boy, but here's the original. In this one, Batman isn't messing around and just shoots his enemies with a gun. Music is fantastic and the gameplay is fast and fun. Graphics aren't much to write the Batcave about though. Gotta give this one to the Game Gear Batman Returns and then the Game Boy Batman game. I really wanted to like the Lynx game, but it's frustrating and you only get 1 life. Battlezone 2000. At first, Battlezone 2000 looks like a cool update to the original arcade game, and yes, it is. You move around in a dark 3D world, blasting tanks, collecting fuel, ammo, and shield power. But the real Battlezone 2000 that's hidden here is a much more complex and graphically interesting game. Multiple tanks, weapons, worlds, and even 3D tanks and enemies to battle. Whoa! Now here's Super Battle Tank for the Game Gear and Game Boy, and they're basically identical. Well, except for the color, of course. I'm sure they get more complex in the later stages, but I just found the gameplay annoying. I've never really seen tanks move like that. Jeez. No contest, Battlezone 2000 is the winner here. The runner-up is the Game Gear Super Battle Tank, thanks to its color. Blue Lightning. One of the earliest showpieces for the Lynx, Blue Lightning looks absolutely incredible. Look at those scaling graphics. There are 9 missions where you battle enemy fighters, tanks, and ships. There's even some stealth missions to accomplish. On the Game Gear, we have G-Lock, which is based on the arcade game, I think. It's a first-person in-cockpit action fighter game, but look at it. The cycling ground graphics are just terrible. Gameplay is rather boring too, and the music is a blippy mess. Now, I couldn't find a similar game on the Game Boy, but I did find Turn and Burn, which kind of reminded me of F-14 Tomcat for the Atari 7800. This is more of a simulator game, and it took me a while to find my enemy, but it seems to be pretty competent. Again, the Lynx wins easily with Blue Lightning. Turn and Burn for the Game Boy comes in second for me. Checkered Flag. The Lynx F1 racer game gives you a crazy 18 tracks, multiple drones to race against, large cars, and highly detailed scaling graphics. You can also connect up to 6 Lynxes and race against your friends. Oh, and check out how the track is superimposed on the sky, and your side mirrors actually work. On Game Gear, we have Super Monaco GP, and it has a respectable 16 tracks and an incredible sense of speed. It looks pretty nice too. Although, unfortunately, only about 2/3 of the screen is dedicated to the game. The other third is for the track and info. F1 Race for Game Boy is notable because it used the 4-player adapter. It also has several tracks to race on, 14 I believe. And it's also dedicating 1/3 of the screen to the track and the info. Come on man, what gives? Speed is great and the crashing is frequent, I'm afraid. Ugh. Checkered Flag gets the checkered flag on this one for me. Super Monaco GP is my runner-up. Desert Strike, Return to the Gulf. For me, it was strange seeing this game on the Lynx because it was so well known on the Genesis. It's a helicopter action game where you rescue soldiers and blast enemy buildings, turrets, aircraft, and such like that. The Lynx version has some very bland-looking visuals. There's not a lot of detail. Also, it feels just a little bit sluggish and choppy, no pun intended. The Game Gear version is actually very smooth and it has far more detailed terrain. The sound is also very easy on the ears. Finally, here's the Game Boy edition. Not sure why it's yellow though. Strange emulator issue, I guess. Anyway, this one feels nice and smooth and it also plays well. Now, I'm no expert on this game, but I really prefer the Game Gear and the Game Boy versions over the Lynx. Dirty Larry. Dirty Larry for the Lynx is obviously a parody of Dirty Harry, a gruff cop who doesn't follow the rules and who enjoys making his chief angry. The visuals here are astounding. So much detail. I really love the animated opening cinematics too. The gameplay is decent, but it's too easy to take hits, and when you die once, it's game over. Over on Game Gear, we have Robocop 3, and it's a port of the home console game. It's extremely tough, and you will take hits no matter what you do. It has some nice visuals, but the hit detection feels a little off. Then here's Game Boy's Robocop game, and it's a fairly basic walk-in shooter, but as you can see, you take a lot of damage. It also gives you just one life. Come on, why they gotta make it so hard? I do like hearing the theme song, and the game is pretty fun despite its limitations. So I'm going to give it to Dirty Larry here. The visuals are just too incredible to ignore. The Game Boy is the runner-up for having the Robocop music, though. Double Dragon. One of the earliest beat-em-ups in the arcade, Double Dragon on Lynx is a graphically identical version. Well, almost. The characters are huge and retain the original game's detail. The problem is that the game is severely zoomed in, making it hard to see incoming enemies. Also, the timing is just off. It kind of feels like the Genesis game, really. Over on Game Gear, I expected it to be like the Sega Master System version, but it's totally different. In fact, you start the game by picking up a gun. It feels more like the Punisher arcade game. Graphics are very detailed, but also very repetitive. The gameplay is okay, but the hits feel weird somehow. Also, I'm not a fan of the music. I think the Game Boy version gets the game right, and it feels very similar to the NES game. The controls are good, and holding the D-pad while attacking will do different moves. For some reason I tended to do a lot of throws. The music is great, and the graphics are appropriately detailed. So between the three, I like the Game Boy version the best, and the Game Gear is my runner-up. The Fidelity Ultimate Chess Challenge. I was very impressed with the graphics in this game, but the 3D mode isn't really a very practical way to play. Selecting and moving your pieces should be easy, but it sometimes feels like your selection doesn't stick, and the computer is sometimes slow to give you your turn. There's no music, and the sound effects are minimal. Over on Game Gear, Chessmaster has some simple graphics, but it gets the job done. Thankfully, it's also very fast.
White, black.
The voice can be a little annoying after a bit, though. Jeez.
White captured, black captured.
Chessmaster on Game Boy is also very fast, and it's very easy to select and move your pieces. The lack of color doesn't hurt this version at all.
Capture. Capture.
So, my winner is the Game Boy version. The sounds aren't annoying, and it is very fast. Meanwhile, the Game Gear is my runner-up.
Capture.
Gates of Zendikon. This is an early and very quirky and non-typical shooter for the Lynx. You start out with a laser, bombs, and a shield. If you get hit, you first lose the shield, and then the laser, and then your whole ship. You can pick up special weapons that makes the game much easier. Each stage is totally different, and it has a crazy amount of enemies. Then we have Aerial Assault for the Game Gear, and it is, your typical side-scrolling shooter. Power-ups will increase your firepower, but the enemies aren't super strong anyway. Graphics and sounds are good, but really nothing special. Nemesis on the Game Boy is a great Konami shooter in the Gradius series. Collect a number of power globes to power up your ship. There's a large variety of enemies, and the visuals are highly detailed. This is what you want from a space shooter. This might be a bit controversial, but Gates of Zendikon is my choice here. There is just nothing like it anywhere. Nemesis is a fantastic game too, really hard to choose. Hockey for the Lynx is a straightforward version of the sport. You can select from multiple teams, and it's played from a side view, much like classic console hockey games. The detailed in-game graphics are great, and there's even some close-ups like the face-off and a great fighting scene. Passing and shooting is easy, and I like that we have an arrow on the goal so you know when the goal is open. NHL hockey on Game Gear looks extremely similar to the Genesis EA Sports game. It's played from behind your player, which is okay, I guess. Some people like it this way, I suppose. The sprites are nice and big, and there's some nice visual details in the rink. Music is kinda ick. I wish it would just go away, it's very annoying. Then we have Blades of Steel for the Game Boy, which is my gold standard for hockey games. Passing is easy, as is the shooting. Just wait until the arrow isn't being blocked by the goalie, and you'll probably score. Graphics are minimal, but there's some cool cutscenes when you get a goal. Also, the music is catchy and pleasant to listen to. Hockey for the Lynx is basically a much improved version of Blades of Steel, but with color and less music. Anyone for tennis? Jimmy Connors on Lynx is a challenging but fun game of tennis. The presentation is very basic, as are the graphics, but it does have some really great voice.
15, 30.
I like how the game gives you a target to stand on so you know where the ball is going. It's still sometimes hard to time your swing, though. Pete Sampras for the Game Gear looks and plays great. There's no target showing where the ball will land, so you just have to kind of guess. Hitting the ball is very satisfying, especially when you get a good volley going. Tennis on the Game Boy is about as basic as it gets. The music is just unnecessary. Come on, man, who's got that boombox? I'm trying to play tennis here. The hits are solid and satisfying, even if the sounds are weird. As a real-life tennis player myself, I really loved Pete Sampras' tennis. Jimmy Connors is also good, but it's very easy to miss the ball. Klax. Atari's arcade tile matching game is absolutely incredible for the Lynx. The arcade game monitor is vertical, so to mimic that, the Lynx version is also played vertically, or as we sometimes call it, Tate mode. No, I refuse to say tate. The details of the game are excellent, and I don't just mean the graphics. The sounds are a huge standout, and the gameplay is tight and highly enjoyable. The Game Gear game is, pretty good. The sounds are kind of weak, as is the tile animation. I don't know, it just looks slippery. Well, at least it's got some nicely detailed graphics. The Game Boy game, honestly, never should have been attempted. This is one title where you really need color for the game to be playable. Using designs on the tiles just doesn't work, and it hurts my brain. And there's not much detail in the backgrounds either. Klax for the Lynx is by far the best home port of the game. The Game Gear's offering is a distant second, though. Kung Food. This is an oddball brawling game where you are a mutated scientist shrunk down to battle mutated food to survive. The gameplay is hampered by the questionable hit detection. I think it needed to be a little more forgiving. The visuals are extremely detailed, but the music is pretty rough. Over on Game Gear, we have Battletoads, which feels a bit watered down compared to the original NES game. I don't know, the hits just don't have that oomph I was hoping for, and the pacing just feels off. The graphics look pretty nice though, I just wish my Toad could crush those plant things properly. Game Boy Battletoads doesn't look as good as the other two games, but it's quite enjoyable. Music is just right and the hits feel good. Very bone-crunching. The second stage was an unexpected surprise. I enjoyed getting some shooting and dodging elements in so early. Of the three, I had the most fun with Game Boy Battletoads. Game Gear Battletoads is my runner-up. Lemmings. This game is essentially the same on all three systems. You just assign your Lemmings skills to help them navigate and survive the stage. What's different is the interface and options. On Lynx, you press the B button to bring up the skill menu, which also pauses the game. Press A on a Lemming to give them that skill. Pressing option 2 turns off the music, and option 1 speeds up the game. The Game Gear version requires you to move your cursor to the bottom of the screen to select a skill, wasting precious time. There's also no in-game way to turn off the music or speed up the game. In the Game Boy version, you press the B button to bring up the skills menu and select with the D-pad. Very easy. You can also turn off the music at the start menu, but not in the game. You also can't speed up the game, unfortunately. I do like the Lynx version the best, and because of how easy it is to select your skills, the Game Boy version is my runner-up. Lynx Casino. In this title, you wander around a casino talking to people and playing games. I like some of the witty comments you get from the patrons. I just wish Elvis would spot me some cash. The standard games apply: blackjack, slots, video poker, craps, and roulette. Controls in each game is easy and intuitive. The music, though, is quite annoying, but fortunately, it can be turned off. Now, if only the carpet wasn't so garish. Yikes! Caesar's Palace on Game Gear has you wandering an empty casino. What is this, Buffalo Bills? The visuals are often way zoomed in, but at least they're nice and clean. Gameplay is a bit too slow for me. Good grief, I'm going to call the name of this blackjack dealer Slowhand Luke. High-stakes gambling on the Game Boy is very basic and only includes 4 selectable games. I wish they had made the video poker machine a bit bigger. It's so tiny. Thankfully, though, blackjack is fast and very fun. I'm going to go with Lynx Casino here for the fast gameplay, and the Game Boy game is my runner-up due to its speed. Malibu Bikini Volleyball. This is a 2-on-2 beach volleyball game with some very detailed graphics. Whoa, look at that coin flip! You can choose your game options as well as your music tracks. I prefer the track called Off. The net has a 3D effect when the ball switches sides, and I like that there's a target on the ground. Over on Game Gear, there is a Japanese exclusive game called Popeye Beach Volleyball, and it looks and plays great. Hitting the ball can be a little sketchy sometimes. Also, the backgrounds are static, but at least there's several of them. I enjoy the cartoony visuals and the variety in the characters that appear. On Game Boy, we have Malibu Beach Volleyball, and it's very basic. It plays fine, but the perspective is from behind your players, which isn't really the best way to play, in my opinion. So this is going to be my first tie. The Lynx and Game Gear games are both great in their own way. That makes the Game Boy game the runner-up here. Ms. Pac-Man. The Lynx version of the classic arcade game has 25 different mazes, including arcade and also large mazes with a lightning power-up. The only thing is that the game is really zoomed out, making all the characters very tiny. Kind of reminds me of the Coleco standalone games. On Game Gear, it's the exact opposite. The game is zoomed in, but the character detail is spot on even if the maze colors are off. I mean, why is the first maze green? It is nice that it changes colors each round, though. The Game Boy game is also zoomed in, but 1/3 of the screen is used up for the status bar, which means it scrolls in all 4 directions. The lack of color only slightly affects gameplay because you're unable to differentiate the monsters, and as you know, each monster behaves differently. The Game Gear version looks and plays the best, I think. Runner-up is the Game Boy version. NFL Football. First of all, NFL Football on Lynx is in tape mode. I understand why they did it, though. I mean, a football field is vertical in nature. but it makes this game less enjoyable having to play this way. In addition, the players are viewed from directly above. There's no angle to the camera. That said, it does have a lot of plays, nice voice, and some nice scaling graphics. Joe Montana football on the Game Gear is outstanding. It's presented in a side view which gives a good view of the field. Executing a play is quick and easy, and it's so satisfying when you complete a pass, or especially when you get a touchdown. There's a cool animation when you score. Thankfully, there's no distracting music when you play. Over on Game Boy, we have NFL football. I think this is the earliest football game for the system, and it shows. It's played with your team on the bottom and your opponent on the top. Music is distracting and the graphics are minimal. Thankfully, the Game Boy got much better football games later on. Joe Montana on Game Gear is my favorite of these football games. NFL football on Lynx is my runner-up. Ninja Gaiden. The Lynx has one of the only ports of the arcade Ninja Gaiden, and it's decently faithful. It appears to have most of the moves and highly detailed visuals. There's objects to break, and sometimes you'll find health or even a sword. The hits are pretty satisfying, and the collision detection is spot on. Over on Game Gear, we have Streets of Rage, which is the premier beat-em-up on the Genesis. This first game on the Game Gear isn't that great. The fighting just feels so weak, and my character grabs the opponents far too often when I just prefer to punch them. Music is a beepy, ear-grating mess. Backgrounds are pretty nice, but the characters are tiny. On Game Boy, we have Double Dragon 2. Well, I mean, we already covered Double Dragon, so here you go. It's got some great visuals and nice animation of the characters, who are appropriately sized. Punching and kicking your opponents is very satisfying, and you can even smash them while they're down. Music is typical Game Boy fare, but it'll pass. Double Dragon 2 on Game Boy was the most enjoyable for me, and then Ninja Gaiden is my runner-up. Sorry, Streets of Rage, you get much better in the next game. Ninja Gaiden 3, The Ancient Ship of Doom. A port of the NES game, Ninja Gaiden 3 on Lynx looks and plays very similar, although I hear the last stage on the Lynx is much easier. The backgrounds are incredibly busy, which makes it hard to see what's going on, at least here on the first stage anyway. Also, the characters are just so tiny, and the music, while accurate to the NES, is kinda grating on my ears. Ninja Gaiden on Game Gear is a very different beast. The first stage is just a basic side-scroller with little ninja jumping or climbing. It's nice to look at, though, with pleasing and clear visuals, although the character animation is, kinda wonky. Also, the music is just there. It's okay, I guess. On Game Boy, we have Ninja Gaiden Shadow, and it really feels like a sequel to the NES games. First of all, the music is perfect. Exactly what I expected in a NES kind of way. Gameplay is fast, and your character moves and attacks smoothly. The background graphics are also nicely detailed. Alright, chalk one up for the Game Boy. Meanwhile, the Lynx game is my runner-up. Paperboy. Time to deliver the boarding papers. Again, this is a great port of the original arcade game for the Lynx. Graphics have that nice pseudo 3D look, and it scrolls nicely. Your Paperboy has the correct animation, and he pedals throughout the game. It also sounds very much like the original, too. On Game Gear, the scrolling feels a bit smoother, your character is larger, and the game is zoomed in. This makes it feel rather cramped. Another thing is that when you throw the paper, it's just way too diagonal. Kinda changes the strategy a bit. Finally, the music is a little weaker than I would like it to be. The Game Boy version is decent with smooth scrolling and pleasant arcade-like music. Due to the lack of color though, I found it harder to differentiate between the houses of subscribers and non-subscribers. They're all the same color! I think the Lynx game is best overall, but runner-up is the Game Boy for having accurate paper-throwing mechanics. Pinball Jam. Here we have two actual pinball tables represented here on the Lynx, Elvira and the Party Monsters, and Police Force. The playfield is huge and scrolls very smoothly. Unfortunately, the graphics are very busy, but they do a good job of mimicking the original tables. There's even elevated tracks for the ball to roll through, giving the game more fun gameplay elements. And I don't want to forget the voice of Elvira. I think it's pretty good.
Leaving so soon? How about another ball?
Pinball Dreams for the Game Gear and Game Boy is based on the computer game and features 3 very flat tables. Feels like these were made with pinball construction set or something. Anyway, the graphics are nice and clear and not busy at all. Both versions feature good ball physics and fun gameplay. I still prefer Pinball Jam because it includes 2 actual tables. Pinball Dreams on Game Gear is the runner-up because it has color. Pit Fighter. Pit Fighter is the closest thing to a one-on-one fighter we got for the Lynx. You can punch, kick, use weapons, throw boxes, and even attack your opponent when they're down. I like that it was the earliest fighter with digitized graphics, even if they don't translate well on the Lynx. The characters even scale in and out, just like the original game. Then we have Mortal Kombat for the Game Gear and Game Boy. Neither of these ports hold a candle to the original arcade, especially in the gameplay department. The game's animation is very jerky, it's missing many of the backgrounds, some of the characters, and even some of the special moves. Now there's a Mortal Kombat homebrew for the Lynx that I think plays better than either the Game Gear or Game Boy ports. Check this out.
Scorpion wins.
Alright, this will probably be very controversial, but I'm choosing Pit Fighter for number 1. It's a more accurate port than either of the 2 Mortal Kombat games, but Game Gear Mortal Kombat is my runner-up. Road Blasters. This is a very fast, very colorful, and very fun race car shooter. Shoot the orange enemy cars and avoid the blue armored cars. The green and red globes will give you more fuel. If you make it halfway, you'll get a fuel boost, and believe me, you're gonna need it. You can crash as many times as you want, but if you run out of fuel, it's game over. Chase HQ for Game Gear is fairly basic. Your job is to catch up to the crook and crash into his car to bring him to justice. The sense of speed is very good, and the backgrounds are nicely detailed, but the colors are a little dull. The Game Boy game is possibly even more dull. I could barely even tell if I was moving sometimes. It does have some hills and road obstacles to keep it interesting. What I find hilarious though is how the regular cars don't pull over to the side when your siren is on. Man, you need to give them a ticket too. Road Blasters is one of the best titles on the Lynx, and it gets my number 1 spot here. Chase HQ for Game Gear is my runner-up. Scrapyard Dog. This is Atari's attempt to do a side-scrolling platform game, and as is their MO, it has to be quirky and different. You play as Louie, who must rescue his dog Scraps. Collect money to buy items to help your cause. The shield is a requirement, otherwise it's a one-hit death. And instead of hopping on enemy heads, you throw cans at them. Okay, that's weird. On Game Gear, we got Sonic the Hedgehog, and it's nothing like the Genesis game, which is a good thing. Gameplay is quite enjoyable, but there's one thing missing: no loop-de-loops. Sadly, Sonic's speed isn't given too many chances to shine. The scrolling and animation is a little herky-jerky, but it doesn't hamper the fun. Over on Game Boy, you surely know that Super Mario Land was the first Mario game. It's a little off, but not bad as a Mario game, just different. For example, there's no fireball, but a bouncy ball instead. The graphics are minimal at best, and it really looks like somebody went wild with a level editor. Fantastic music though. Sonic gets my top spot here, followed by Super Mario Land. But don't ignore Scrapyard Dog, that's also a fun game. Shanghai. I never thought I would fall in love with this game, but I did. It's a very simple tile matching game. Just find two of the same tile that could be freely slid out left or right. The Lynx game has 8 different arrangements, easy to read tiles with shading, and it's also very easy to select the tiles. In Japan, the Game Gear got Shanghai 2, which has solitaire, tournament, and challenge modes, as well as different tile arrangements. But the tiles are harder to read in any mode since they're all symbols. Once you select your 2 tiles, you must press button 1 again to make them disappear. For the Game Boy, I didn't see a way to select different tile arrangements, unless there's more after beating the dragon. The tile designs are very complicated too, but you can change them into super basic numbers. Ugh. Like the Game Gear game, you also have to press the button 3 times to eliminate tiles. My winner here is the Lynx version, and runner-up is the Game Gear. Super Off-Road. A top-down truck racing game where you avoid mud puddles, jump your truck on ramps, and collect or buy power-ups. Because of its low resolution, the Lynx game is very zoomed in. The details are nice though, and I especially like how the flags sway after you pass underneath them. I just wish the animation and screen scrolling wasn't so choppy. Over on Game Gear, it's much smoother but also a bit too fast. I kept crashing into the walls if I laid into the gas pedal. But if you take it slow, then your opponents will kick your butt, so you're screwed either way. The Game Boy version is super slow. It's almost as if it's underpowered for such a game. Scrolling is a little choppy here too, but that crashing sound effect is just too much for my ears. Giving it to the Game Gear thanks to its smooth scrolling. The Lynx is my runner-up though. Switchblade 2. This is a slow-paced side-scrolling action game where you attack enemies with a sword or a gun for long-range enemies. There's even a shop for buying more power-ups. Graphics are okay, but at least there's a variety of stage types. Over on Game Gear, we have GG Shinobi, which is a classic. It has good visuals, great music, and lots of stages and gameplay variety. Some of the enemies require a bit of strategy to defeat, like this guy here where you have to jump over his bullets. Then there's this stage where you have to ride logs. It seems like no 2 stages are the same, which is awesome. On Game Boy, we have a port of Ninja Spirit. It uses animated background tiles to fake parallax scrolling, much like the TurboGrafx 16 did. The music is pretty good. As soon as I think it's too repetitive, it changes. The sword swinging action is smooth and satisfying to slash those enemies. There's some power-ups to make it a bit easier too. I just wish I could have beaten the first boss. What am I doing wrong here? GG Shinobi is my pick here, and Ninja Spirit is my runner-up. However, Switchblade 2 is pretty good if you like a more adventure-style ninja game. World Class Soccer. This is an on-the-field game of soccer. The camera is very close to the players, which makes it hard to see what's going on the field. Or is it called a pitch? The scrolling and character animation is extremely choppy. Over on Game Gear, Tengen World Cup is a hyperactive version of soccer. Holy cow, look at it! The graphics are pretty good, but the pitch is quite static and there's not much detail. Still, a very fun arcade soccer game. Then Game Boy Soccer Mania is, pretty bad in comparison to the others. It's a very kiddie-oriented game with practically no detail on the field. The music is also quite annoying. I had the most fun with Tengen World Cup. World Class Soccer is my second choice here. Sorry, Game Boy. Zarler Mercenary. This is a top-down shooter with some incredibly detailed graphics. You get multiple characters, lots of weapons, and several different stages. You can shoot just about anything. Buildings, ships, little people running around on the ground, and you get paid by the amount of destruction you dish out. The number of sprites in this one is just amazing, but sometimes gets a little overwhelming. Over on Game Gear, we have Haley Wars, a more traditional space shooter. You can pick up icons to power up your ship, and fortunately you don't lose anything when you get hit. Well, maybe one level of power. It has okay graphics and music, but it plays pretty nice. Solar Striker for Game Boy is also a traditional space shooter. If you get hit, your power-up is knocked down by 1, so at least you don't have to start all over. I like the sounds and music, but it's not much in the graphics department. Zarler Mercenary is an overlooked gem and an amazing shooter. Haley Wars is okay, and it's my runner-up. Alright, well that's gonna do it. I'm sure my picks will not be controversial at all, so instead tell me in the comments below how you agree with everything I said. All kidding aside, I want to thank you for watching, take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye everyone.